Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi everyone, welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host Bill DeFilippo, joined tonight by my co-host Matt DeBear. Matt, what's going on?
I'm doing well, Bill. We were just talking. This is the first time you and I have chatted, at least in this media, for several months. I think it was a season preview, and here we are, postseason, end of the regular season, and finally get to see your lovely face again.
You flatter me, Matt. I think you know why I am in a good mood, but it's a unique reason to my current living situation and the living situation that you had for the first 18 years of your life. And that is that I got to experience one of the world's greatest joys, something I recommend everyone experiences at least once in their life before they go to meet their maker. And that is I got to listen to Columbus Sports Talk Radio today in the aftermath of Michigan State just kicking Michigan, just kicking Ohio State's teeth in. It truly is one of the funniest things I've ever gotten a chance to experience.
It's, I know I've told you this before, and you haven't lived in Columbus that long, relatively speaking, but the week following an Ohio State loss, regardless of who it's against, is one of the more enjoyable experiences of one's life if you're not an Ohio State fan. And I was telling you earlier today that I think two of my favorite weeks of my life, because I was still living in Columbus after I graduated, were after the 2005 game and then the 2008 game when Penn State won. But, obviously you and I are not Michigan fans, but the vitriol and hatred that Ohio State fans have for them and their desire 365 days a year to beat the brains out of Michigan is so strong that when it doesn't happen, and now it hasn't happened for two straight, they haven't beat them now technically since 2019 because they didn't have the game in 2020 when Michigan backed out with the COVID test and whatnot. So they have not experienced that joy in 3 years now. And I think you can probably attest this better than I can living there now. They really thought this was the year. They thought that, last year was the aberration. It was in Ann Arbor. It was the bad weather. Michigan had Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson, but they were going to get him this year. They couldn't match up with the passing game. They couldn't slow down that elite Ohio State offense. And as you said, they just got their teeth kicked in. And it was, I watched the game with some Michigan fan family. And I don't have a huge reading interest in the game. And we can make a case either one way or the other, whatever benefits Penn State more, an Ohio State win or a Michigan win. But the enjoyment that my family sitting on my couch got watching that game kind of rubbed off on me a little bit. And I was getting into it there, especially late when Edwards broke the two long runs that put the game away. And then just knowing what it was like back in Columbus. I got a text from my mom today who still lives in Ohio and is a Michigan fan. Something to the effect of, I am loving listening to sports talk radio so much right now.
Oh, dude, it was a blessing. It was actually funny because that exact thing you said about this being, last year being an aberration, and then the stuff that you listed were verbatim things that I heard listed on Columbus Sports Talk Radio today about the weather, about it being in Columbus, about literally about Ojabo and Hutchinson not being, all of these things verbatim got listed. It was beautiful. It was hilarious. I don't think any Michigan fans listen to the podcast, but if you do, I spend the next 364 days stunning because you absolutely believe this. And I think you are probably going to beat up on Ohio State again next season, but that's for another podcast. We're here to talk about the Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State finished up their regular season with a 35-16 win over Michigan State to move to 10-2 on the year. Really great win for Penn State. But before we get into talking about the game, Matt, there was some huge huge news in the Penn State Twitterverse today, and that is that Penn State is going to have its starting left tackle Olu Fashanu back next season. Fashanu, a potential top 10 pick in the 2023 NFL draft. There were a couple of reports that came out that said he was going to return to Happy Valley. And then today he put out a statement saying, for the last 3 years, I've been blessed to have the opportunity to be around a group of extremely hardworking individuals. Everyone in this program has pushed me to become a better football player and, more importantly, a better man. Having the opportunity to play in Beaver Stadium in front of the best fans in the world this past year has been great, and I will never forget the moments that were created with this team this season. You would expect the next words to be, I'm forgoing my eligibility and going to the NFL draft, with how that's paragraph sent it up. But instead, he wrote, although playing in the NFL is a goal of mine, there is still more that I want to achieve personally and collectively as a program. After several conversations with my parents and coaches, I will be returning to Penn State for the 2023 season. I want to thank my family, teammates, and coaches who have helped me get to this point in my life. My work here is far from over, and I look forward to getting back to work with my brothers. Matt, I think you were probably like me, where we had all heard all the stuff, this kid's wired a little bit different, his priorities are a little bit different, all these sorts of things. But it was really hard to imagine anyone, no matter how noble your priorities are, turning down going and being potentially a top 10, top 5 pick in an NFL draft. And yet here we are. He's doing exactly that to come back to Penn State next season.
Yeah, it feels like unexpected good news in a way, because like you said, guys just don't turn down that opportunity, that amount of money, rightfully so. And if you aren't a subscriber, go check out On3 and subscribe and check out what Sean Fitz had to say about kind of this whole process and how James Franklin and the coaching staff worked through it with them. Because it's really, I think, really enlightening as far as James Franklin's priorities, in a very, very positive way, and what Olu Fashanu and his family's priorities are, again, in a very positive way. But like you said, there's been this undercurrent of, we think he's going to be back. That's kind of, what his family would like him to do. He's still only 19. He'd be just 20 years old as a rookie in the NFL. That'd be a kind of a weird dynamic, with these grown men and all that sort of thing. But you just don't expect the guy to turn down, I don't know what top 10 money is in the NFL, but $20 million, $30 million, guaranteed money, life-changing money, generational money, because of the risk of that coming back is there. And that's still there, obviously. But it was one of those, I don't think you or I really expected it to come out at this point,
Right.
The season ended, less than 48 hours ago, really. And, he's already signing back up. He obviously hasn't played for about a month since the Ohio State game. But I love what this says about, Olu and his family as people, their priorities of, finish your education, get that degree, make sure you're set for life, regardless of what happens on the football field. But I think from a very football centric perspective, it's a huge testament to, I think, where the program is right now, the way it's been rebuilt over the last couple of years, the culture that's there, the leadership within the program, both from a coaching and player perspective, that a guy with all that going for him wants to be back, sees what's on the horizon, sees the potential that the next year's team has, and wants to be a part of it. And I think hopefully this is a sign of, health of the program, what the players feel about, the opportunities that are there for them. I think from a very practical standpoint, I think it's probably a testament to the NIL opportunities that are there. Like it or not, that's here to stay. And it's, I'm sure a factor in guys like Olu and players that are of that caliber considering coming back and turning down those multi-million-dollar contracts. And I hope that it has, everyone has to make their own decision, but I hope it's a positive sign for guys like Curtis Jacobs or Parker Washington who have their own decisions to make, that they see a guy like this coming back for another go with it, because they see, like I said, that potential that 2023 football team has.
Yeah, I mean, looking at last year's contract values for top NFL draft picks. So for a 4-year contract, the number 10 pick in last year's draft, Garrett Wilson, out of Ohio State, went to the Jets. Got a 4-year deal worth $22.6 million. Fashanu got as high as number 5 on Dane Brugler of the Athletics big board. Number 5 pick this past year, Oregon's Kayvon Thibodeau to the Giants, a 4-year, $34.7 million. He's turning down life-changing money, not just life-changing for him, but life-changing for his family, his friends, whomever in there is going to need help and support from Olu Fashanu over the years. And, there's an inherent risk to that. Matt, you and I have been football fans long enough. We remember Matt Barkley was supposed to be a surefire number 1 overall NFL draft pick. Goes back to USC, gets hurt, goes in the 4th round, and has just been an NFL journeyman carved out a nice career, but NFL journeyman ever since. It is not easy to turn this down. And like you mentioned, we don't know for sure how NIL would factor into this. Obviously, we can make our assumptions. We'll probably assume there's something going on there, something very legal going on there, worth mentioning. But it's a testament to Fashanu, his priorities, the things that he cares about. In an interview with Pete Thamel of ESPN, he said that part of the reason he's doing this is because he specifically wants to help Penn State compete for a Big Ten and national championship next year. It takes a really special caliber of person to want to focus on that. It says a lot about his family and the people around him who've established that your education is important. He's going to be graduating, he's going to be graduating with a degree in supply chain management. That is not an easy thing to do, and yet he has decided he is going to put off the NFL for a year in order to do that. And that's a testament to James Franklin and Phil Troutwine, Mike Yurcich, the rest of the offensive line, that it is more important to Olu Fashanu to be part of something special at Penn State and be part of a Penn State team that, all of a sudden, if Drew Aller is the chosen one, we're talking about next year's Penn State team as potentially competing for a national championship. And it speaks to so many different people that we are now finding a program in that position. And one of the single biggest question marks that we had going into next year was who's going to be lining up at left tackle. Is it going to be Drew Shelton, a nice player, a really promising player, but a guy who, as we saw this week against Michigan State, still has some work that needs to be done? Or is it going to be the guy who, in his 9 starts as a college football player, is already having people wondering, boy, can this guy be a top 10, a top 5 NFL draft pick? So, I could not be more excited about what this means for Penn State. You and I, we've talked about this amongst ourselves, Matt, but you go through the list of other guys who have decisions to make. Who knows what this means for a guy like Juice Scruggs and if whether or not he wants to come back and he wants to use his extra year of eligibility. Who knows if a guy like Parker Washington, who I think is going to be a good NFL player, but I don't think I think he can help his stock a little by coming back. I don't think he can hurt himself at all by coming back. Other than, getting some kind of injury and, I'm not going to knock on wood because my dog's here and he'd start barking at me. Maybe there's an NIL deal. Maybe there's some other way to convince him, hey, come back for another year. Maybe that works for a guy like Brenton Stranger, like you said, a Curtis Jacobs, or, Adisa Isaac could technically go to the NFL. Maybe he doesn't after this past year. So it's hard, Matt, not to start looking at the rest of the team and what it could mean for guys who have decisions to make after the guy with the biggest decision to make 2 days after the regular season ended said, I'm going back to Penn State.
Yeah, and I think it's you see it with these teams that start the year with that hype. I go back to Clemson a couple years ago after Christian Wilkins decided that he was coming back. Ohio State a couple years ago when Chris Olave decided he was coming back. Guys that are surefire top, first round NFL draft picks, if not top 10, top 5 NFL draft picks that have, huge dollar signs in front of them that want to get that first NFL contract because you get your second one sooner that way. See what that roster looks like as far as the talent that's coming back. And Penn State just, quite frankly, hasn't really had a lot of that. They've had it with Jaquan Brisker a couple years ago, Jair Brown last year, a little bit here and there. But you think about this year's team with Brandon Smith on it, or think about this year's team with, there are some of the guys that opted to forego an extra year. Does that put them over the top this year, maybe in one of those games against Ohio State, for example? I think this, I don't want to harp on it too much, but I think it's such a testament to where the program is, especially when you look at where we thought the program was 3 months ago, with all the questions that we had. Is this a 7-win team? Is this a 10-win team?
Yes.
What's James Franklin's, shelf life at Penn State? So much of that has been answered this year. And I think looking at kind of the anecdotal evidence of what, kind of James Franklin's personality and you see the way he just, his energy level and his level of humor and things like that. The energy on the sidelines during games. This feels a lot more like a Penn State team that we remember from pre-COVID, if you will, as far as just the fun they're having and the camaraderie between the players on the team. It's a program that guys want to be a part of, that guys that see what's going on want to enjoy as much of it as they can. Jair Brown, over the last week or 10 days leading into his final game at Beaver Stadium last weekend, I think is a testament to that. He's, said something to the effect of wanting to soak in every last minute because he's just enjoyed being a part of the Penn State football program for the last several years. You saw it, we see it with Olu. You're seeing it with the recruits that are coming in. Certainly you're going to hear about it from guys that come in via the transfer portal over the next month or two. I don't want to get too big picture because it is just one guy making a decision that's what's right for him. But if the program isn't where it is right now, then it's probably an easy decision for a guy like Olu Fashanu to make the other way. Yes, the educational side of it is the age factor is still there, but maybe you look past some of those things because, well, I don't want to transfer, and I just don't think that what I'm coming back to is the right place for me. So you move on to the NFL. Like I said earlier, you see places like Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, these elite teams, Georgia, year after year have guys that turn down that NFL opportunity because of what they're coming back to with their own football team.
Yeah. And if I can interrupt you, Matt, they're turning down that opportunity because they see, I can go to the NFL right now and be a late first round, early second round pick, or I could come back, put on a show in my final year and go be a top 10 pick. And Penn State Fashanu seemed like he was trending in that direction anyway. So he's a little bit different, but it makes you hope and wonder that, hey, again, maybe a guy like Curtis Jacobs can do that. Maybe a guy like Juice Scruggs can improve his stock by a round or two. Maybe a guy like Parker Washington can improve his stock by a round or two. Like this is something that it's very easy to just say kids are going to jump and take the money, but it's something that it's a decision for a lot of these kids. And, I'm an advocate of go get paid as soon as you possibly can. But if you see an opportunity to make more money by coming back for 1 year, God bless you. I am happy to have you in Happy Valley.
Well, I think one last thought is we mentioned Jaquan Brisker, PJ Mustipher is a guy who Jahan Dotson did it a couple years ago. I think seeing what those guys have done, Jahan Dotson turned himself into a first round draft pick by Washington. Jaquan Brisker played his way into a second round draft pick. The Mustipher situation is obviously a little bit different with his injury recovery, but they've seen what the Penn State program can do for guys that are borderline picks, for lack of a better term, that, the money as a fourth rounder is not nearly as good as the money as a second rounder. And I can come back to this place, work with this group of coaches, trainers, my fellow players, and get better and ultimately make myself more money, and improve my value to the NFL. This is a place I can do that. And that certainly has played a part in it too. So I think those guys that have done this before certainly deserve some credit as well, because they saw that same opportunity and took advantage of it.
And we'll surely talk about Fashanu and everyone else who has big decisions to make this offseason. We need offseason content. That's a really good source of it. So we will get to the rest of those guys in a bit. But we're going to talk now about Penn State's win over Michigan State. Again, 35-16 Nittany Lions win at home, bringing the land-grant trophy back to Happy Valley to move to 10-2 on the season. Matt, before we get into anything else about the game, you are our resident Michigan State correspondent. One question I have, James Franklin and all of his players this week seemed like they were viewing and talking about the land grant trophy like it was the funniest goddamn thing on the planet. What was in just your noticing of stuff by nature of living with a Spartan? Did you notice Mel Tucker, Michigan State's players, also had seeming similarly upbeat, jovial, having fun with the entire thing?
Not a whole lot about the Michigan State football program has been jovial this year. So that's point number one.
Yeah.
It's funny you ask because text thread with friends of ours who are Penn State alums with my wife and I, who, as you mentioned, is a Michigan State fan, asked the same question. And I think part of it is they've got the Paul Bunyan trophy they played for against Michigan. And I don't know if it's maybe just the lunacy that is Penn State social media and Penn State Twitter specifically that makes us more infatuated with this. I don't know if there's, Michigan State Twitter is out there, making the same jokes about it. Yeah. But I think our unique brand of lunacy on Twitter and online is one reason why the land grant trophy has kind of taken on this personality unto itself. But no, I don't get into the weeds with, the Michigan State websites and message boards and things like that. But in the more mainstream media, if you will, there isn't really this year, any year, not a whole lot of talk about it. I even think of Audrey Snyder. Nick and I talked about this last week. Audrey Snyder wrote an article about the origins of the land grant trophy and the trophy shop in East Lansing that constructed this monstrosity 30 some years ago for George Perlis, the head coach at Michigan State when Penn State joined the league. So you even have beat writers that are chasing this down from the Penn State side of things. I just don't see that with Michigan State, and I don't know if it's like I said, the Paul Bunyan trophy factor with Michigan. And like I said, it's not unique to this season either. This isn't a matter of it's been a rough season in East Lansing and they just, aren't having as much fun as we certainly have had this year. I just don't think it registers for one reason or another the way it does with Penn State fans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I do not mean this as an insult, but like you can definitely see how the approach is that both schools, both groups of players take to it seems to be a reflection of each school's head coach. Like Mel Tucker, I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm not saying this right, but he's a big time hard ass and he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who jokes about a ton of stuff. Meanwhile, James Franklin, Penn State put out that graphic on, let's see, Sunday,
Tuesday or Wednesday, maybe
Tuesday last week, where they had Sean Clifford, Jair Brown, James Franklin, and Jonathan Sutherland all give 5-star reviews of the land grant trophy. So like it was just interesting to me because like you mentioned, this has been a really tough year for Michigan State. I mean, you and I were talking before we started the podcast about how like, I think Michigan State really sucks this year. They're 67th at SP plus after this game. And we saw that on the field, I thought, Matt, as we were watching this game, it felt like the only way Michigan State had any chance to win it was just total nonsense because Penn State outgained them by a ton. They ran passing yards. Penn State outgained them by 31, rushing yards 160 to 25 for Penn State. Turnovers, Michigan State had 3, Penn State had 0. Penn State controlled the time of possession, was way better. Blah, blah, blah. But it felt like the only way that Michigan State had any chance to win this game was if just some total nonsense happened. Was there any moment in this game where you were worried about Michigan State being able to pull off the upset?
The drive where Michigan State cut it to 21-16 because as you said, for Michigan State to win the game, some weird stuff had to happen, and that was the drive of weird stuff. There was the 3rd and 18 conversion, which was actually a great throw by Thorne. You see, Nick and I talked about this last week, the up and down nature of Peyton Thorne. And then on that same drive, I think it was another 3rd down where Penn State got pressure on him right away, and he just threw up a prayer that somehow got completed. It was one of those, oh God, here we go. And I think Keon Coleman and Jaden Reed made a couple big time catches on that same drive too. Not on the same type of throw it and hope kind of plays that I'm talking about that I think everyone remembers, but just well defended plays where the receiver, was just better. I thought, and you could sense through social media, and I'm sure those of you that text with friends during the game, we're all kind of sensing the same sort of angst. It's 21-16. Michigan State had driven 75 and 70 yards on consecutive drives to cut it to the 1-score game. Penn State gets the ball back. Hadn't really done a whole lot on offense at that point in the second half, short of the touchdown off of the fumble on the punt return by Jaden Reed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of a credit to, and we're going to talk about this more, I'm sure, Sean Clifford, and just he's been there and done everything at this point. There's not a thing in college football he hasn't seen. And I think you felt kind of the calmness that we've got this. And even when they got stopped on that 3rd and short out of the tee, and they zero hesitation to go for it right away, the audible to the play where Nick Singleton scores. It never. I was a little bit of anxiety, just because it's a close game, and I think we all said some version of, oh God, here we go again. We've seen this movie before with Michigan State, Penn State. But I don't think I ever felt like they're going to lose this game. But I think that was kind of, it's stating the obvious here, was obviously the key moment in the game. But there was no, I didn't feel any panic from Penn State. They hadn't done anything on offense in the second half, but they went right out there and went right down the field in 11 plays and 75 yards, ate up over 6 minutes. No hesitation to go for it on 4th down. I'm sure Jake Pinniger's struggles in the first half played a part of that, but I think it's, kind of the way each team season has gone. Penn State has, other than those 2 games against the best 2 teams they're going to play, and the best 2 teams and a lot of teams we're going to play this year, they found a way. They, made the plays they needed to make on offense. They came back. They forced another prayer by Peyton Thorne that Kalen King picked off, and they kind of flipped the game in the matter of a half dozen plays or more between the end of that scoring drive, the interception, and then the long touchdown pass to Keandre Lambert-Smith.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan State was basically doing the thing where they were chucking up prayers and just coming down with them somehow. I mean, it's something that watching it happen, you can't help but think about all the times, not just to Penn State, but other teams. It seems like Michigan State will just do this too, and it sucked. It really sucked, but hey, it made for a good football game. Like you mentioned, it was that one drive that had me, to make it 21-16. Have the drive chart up. Where the hell did I put that? Right here. They made it 21-16 with a touchdown with 10:52 left in the 4th quarter. Penn State comes out right after that, and that was the drive that ended with Sean Clifford and Nick Singleton. They motioned out of the T formation and scored a touchdown. So we'll do what we normally do, look at both sides of the football and start with Penn State's defense. Michigan State gained, as I said, 254 yards total offense, 4 for 14 on 3rd downs, 229 passing yards, 5.2 yards per attempt, 25 rushing yards on 25 attempts, 3 turnovers. Matt, at this point, I don't know what there is to say about Penn State's defense. This has just been, I'm not going to go out and say this is the best defense Penn State has had in my time liking the team. That would be an inaccurate statement. But when this defense is on and this defense is cooking, even against an offense like Michigan State that I don't think is particularly good, they are capable of playing some of the most fun, devastating, destructive football of any team in the country.
Yeah, I think and I'm not going to do the best defense I've ever seen. I think it's the most entertaining defense I've seen from Penn State in the 20 some years I've followed the program since I enrolled all those years ago. It's so much more aggressive. It's so much more athletic from top to bottom than some really, really good defenses that we all remember over the years. Statistically, it might not be as good, but like I said, I think it's the most entertaining because you've got, guys like Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs, attacking, taking advantage of that elite athleticism they have. Seeing guys like Joey Porter and Kalen King one-on-one making plays. It's fun to watch, creating chaos. And I'm looking at the stats here, and they gave up 229 yards of passing, but I think that undersells how good they were. Like we said earlier, there was some just fluke plays, a couple of fluke plays and a couple of really good plays where their guy just made a play. Nick and I talked about it in the preview last week that Michigan State's advantage on or strength on offense is their receivers, Keon Coleman and Jaden Reed, and they showed that they're two really good players. Jaden Reed's going to be a good NFL player. He just announced yesterday that he's foregoing his last year. But only 25 yards rushing. I don't remember. I'd have to look at the stats here by players, but Elijah Collins apparently had an 11-yard run. I don't remember that. I don't remember Michigan State doing anything remotely dangerous on the ground. Jalen Berger had 7 carries for 14 yards. Five of those came on 1 carry. They were just. I think the nature of the Manny Diaz defense, as we've talked about since he was hired, is they're going to give up the big play, and we've seen that all year. But they forced 3 more turnovers. They probably could have had a couple more based on some of the passes that Thorne threw up that he was very lucky to get away with. But it's been enjoyable, especially the last month of the season here, where it's almost like the light bulb went on and they finally stopped thinking about, okay, this in this system, this is what I do. This went out there and played. And, obviously these players are athletically fast, that, they're fast runners, but they cut out that thought process. They cut out that half second hesitation where they had to think about, okay, this is what I do when this happens. And you saw the benefits of that. And I'm very excited, to get a little big picture here about what this means going forward. Because I think, barring some unforeseen job offer, Manny Diaz is going to be back next year. A lot of the key cogs in this defense are going to be back next year, and they're going to be adding to it with transfers and recruits and guys that redshirted this year. I'm really, really excited about what we see in year 2 because that learning curve is gone for the bulk of the guys they're going to play. And see what Abdul Carter does. It's cliche, but the guy's only a freshman, and the plays he's making. And I think it's probably not an understatement to say that he probably doesn't have a whole lot of idea what he's doing necessarily. He's just that gifted athletically that he can do some of the stuff he's doing. Just think about what he does with another year in the strength and conditioning program, another year of experience just playing linebacker at the collegiate level. And the guys they're going to add to it, God, I hope Curtis Jacobs comes back from a selfish standpoint because of what a guy like what he can do in year 2 in a system like this.
Yeah, I mean, Kalen King had 5 passes defended, a tackle for a loss, and a pick. Kalen King has a case for being an all-American cornerback this season, and he has to come back next season. I mean, the entire Penn State defense, Jair Brown, losing him is going to really suck. Losing PJ Mustipher is going to suck. Jonathan Sutherland's a guy I think they're going to be able to replace, but you could tell that he just has like a really good pulse of this team. And then otherwise, you're looking at this defense and it's bringing just about everybody back, or is going to have an opportunity to bring just about everybody back. But in this game specifically, like you mentioned, Michigan State did nothing on the ground. This was one of the best performances we have seen by Penn State's rushing defense. Again, 25 yards, 25 carries, 1 touchdown. It was just that one little keeper by Peyton Thorne on that. Like Thorne ran it in for 2 yards or whatever, but otherwise, they just could not get anything. It was all about their passing game. I thought Penn State's secondary played a fantastic game, and How many times over the years have we seen 50-50 balls get thrown up in a Michigan State game and Michigan State receivers turn them into 70-30 balls? Like I can't be that upset by just about anything that happened in this effort. You look at when they allowed points, they allowed a touchdown in each quarter in the second half. Both were on pretty long drives where they couldn't get off the field, and that was basically just because Michigan State players kept making plays. So I was very excited with this effort by Penn State's defense. I don't really know if there's too terribly much. I don't know if there's too terribly much else that we can say that we haven't said all season, because that's just what they've done. So let's move to the offensive side of the football, where was not a gross day. Well, it was not a great day. It was a pretty unsettling day, or at least it seemed like that, Matt. When I read off these stats for the offense, 50% of their third downs completed, 410 yards of total offense, 10 yards per attempt through the air, 3.5 yards per rush. I think for the running backs, that number is a little bit closer to like 4.2 or 4.3, something like that. And no turnovers. It didn't feel like they had that emphatic of a day. It felt like they were in the mud a little bit. At least that's how I felt about it. What about you?
Yeah, it felt like a 4:00 game with a stadium that was probably about 2/3 to 3/4 full against a team that wasn't probably fully invested, but did some things that I think caused them some trouble, especially with, Drew Shelton starting at left tackle in his third or fourth career start as a true freshman. Hunter Norris out is clearly not 100%. Salim Wormley is, I think, clearly not 100%. It's a banged up offensive line, both in terms of guys who are out, like Olu Fashanu, obviously, and the guys who were in there and gutted through it. I'm looking at the stats here. They gave up 3 sacks, 8 tackles for loss. Michigan State, I think, was very aggressive in selling out to stop the run.
Agreed.
And with Parker Washington, Penn State hasn't really found their way in the passing game, really, until that drive where they put it back to a 2-score lead at 28-16. And I think a lot of credit goes to a guy like Keandre Lambert-Smith, who James Franklin called out after the game and said that, it's never been a question of talent. It's just the consistency and not letting one mistake, whether it's a drop pass or a missed route or a missed block, affecting the next snap, affecting the next series. And certainly the most complete game we've seen from Keandre Lambert-Smith, not even counting the touchdown pass he threw to his roommate, Theo Johnson. But it felt like they kind of figured out how this offense works without Parker Washington in the second half a little bit. And hopefully that's a good sign, not just for the bowl game, but I think going forward in next year, because we don't know yet if Parker Washington is going to be back. But I think, like I said, a guy like Keandre Lambert-Smith, who the talent has never been the question. It's just that consistency. If a guy like him takes that next step and can become that number one type receiver, then that takes this offense to a whole nother level. If a guy like Harrison Wallace, who only had the one catch, but there's all these guys that have a really big offseason at wide receiver for Penn State. If they can figure that out, whether it's those two guys or Caden Saunders or Amari Evans, some of these guys that are younger guys that don't have a lot of experience yet can take that next step, then this offense goes to the next level. And you saw they hit a couple passes and it opened up the running game a little bit. It allowed Katron Allen on that drive to get a little bit more space. It allowed Nick Singleton to get a little more space. And like I said earlier, as far as kind of that nervy moment of the game, they never really panicked. They internally kind of played it like they always knew they were going to figure this out. And that was kind of what it was. It's kind of what it's been a little bit offensively since Washington got hurt, and kind of figuring out how all these pieces fit together, because he was such a key part of it. And it allowed teams to play them defensively a little bit different, knowing that they were really going to, be even more aggressive at trying to establish the running game.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the struggles that the running game had with efficiency, because it seemed there were a few moments where Allen and Singleton were able to, break one here or there, but it seemed like Michigan State just did a really good job. 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers who were leading forward a little bit, I think is a safe thing to say, and then maybe bringing pressure from somewhere else. It seemed like you mentioned, with no Parker Washington, they were really selling out to stop Penn State from Penn State's running game, and they dared Sean Clifford to beat them. And, credit to Allen and Singleton, eventually they were able to get going. But 2 things I want to mention with Clifford. I thought this was his best game of the season. I thought he saved his best for last. I think you can point to some other games he played. If you want to say the Minnesota game, I would totally hear that. If you want to say the Purdue game, sure, I'll hear that. But even with 202 yards, I thought this was his best game. And that was because he was able to be the best version of Sean Clifford, which is a guy who gets into a rhythm, is able to avoid mistakes, is able to make some really great throws. That touchdown pass that he threw to Tyler Warren was a seed. And I could not have been more impressed with that part of his effort. The 2 things I want to mention with him. One, the way he ended this game was ridiculous. He started at 6 for 11, not bad. He ended it 19 for 24. He completed all of his final 13 passes. And when, Matt, like you and I mentioned, there was a point in this game where it was 21-16. It seemed like Michigan State was one drive away from all the anxiety that can pop up in Happy Valley when things don't go well, popping back up. After that drive, when it was 21-16, Penn State, 11 plays, 75 yards, scored a touchdown. That was the drive where they motioned out of the T formation, and Mel Tucker decided that calling a timeout there was unnecessary for reasons I don't totally understand. So there's that. And I think that was really important, like we mentioned, with the struggles that the running game had, that Clifford was able to have the sort of game where he's throwing it accurately. He's throwing his guys. Like, there are times when he's just throwing passes to guys who I thought were covered, and he's just putting them in really good spots. And I think that was a really good way for him to go out. But there was one moment in the game in particular that I want to mention, because this is something that I think was a really important moment in the game, which was Penn State's up 14-3. And there is a 3rd and 2 somewhere. I don't remember exactly where. Give me 1 second and I'll find. There we go. Okay. Penn State. It wasn't 14-3. Apologies. It was 21-17. Or 21-10. Sean Clifford gets sacked. And while he gets sacked on the play, he has the ball pretty loosely in his hand. Oh, wait, no, I do. It was 14-3. Apologies. Has the ball pretty... Sorry, for some reason, ESPN says one drive. There was 9 minutes and 42 seconds on every play. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? So, 7:15 left in the third quarter. 3rd and 2, 14-3 Penn State. Clifford drops back. 3 Michigan State players just swarm him. The ball is just in his hand. And the ball, if it falls out of his hand right there, it's being recovered. Michigan State has the ball on Penn State's 35. And he was able to hold on to that. And I think it was a really, I think that was a big moment in the game. He was able to prevent Penn State from making the kind of backbreaking mistake that Michigan State needed to force them into. And as a result, Penn State was able to go on and win the game. He had a fantastic game. He, again, avoided mistakes, did everything that you expect out of Sean Clifford. The downside, didn't see Drew Aller. Oh, well, that's unfortunate. But I thought Clifford, even though he spent a little bit more time on his back than he has in recent weeks, 3 sacks, I thought he played a fantastic game.
Yeah, I think you touched on all of it there. He's he finished as strong as you can, the 13 or 14 straight passes, especially in crunch time there, when the game was in doubt with one possession, Michigan State all the momentum. And we know this by now after 4 years of playing. He very much is what he is. And it just felt good. I talked about this with Nick last week. It felt good to see him go out, a guy who, on-field performance aside, has represented Penn State as well as you can ask any player, especially the starting quarterback at Penn State, to represent the university in the football program. It felt good to see him get that moment. I hope everyone was able to see some of the social media stuff with he and his brother playing catch on the field after the game, racing down the field. It, on a sport where it's become more and more, national championship, college football or bust. It felt good to see one of those college football kind of moments for a guy that's a good college football quarterback. That's kind of what he is as a football player. I'm sure he'll get a shot, on his practice squad or something, or in an NFL camp. But to kind of get that last big moment on the field, as a critical cog for a team, it felt good to see him get that moment.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that the entire game missed was a Sean to Liam Clifford touchdown, which hopefully Penn State gets that in the bowl. Like you mentioned, that moment after the game where the two of them were just playing catch on the field was awesome. Like you mentioned, this is becoming the NFL essentially, and to see that in that situation was really cool. Let's see, there was one. Oh yeah, Keandre Lambert-Smith throwing a touchdown to Theo Johnson. That ruled, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but Clifford. Oh yeah, he went up to Clifford after and said, and Clifford apparently said to him, "I already have Drew breathing down my neck. Now I have to worry about you." So like, really, really fun. I was glad they went deep into their bag to get that out, and that was a very funny line from Sean Clifford. But Penn State on the day, 250 passing yards, 5 touchdowns. We'll hand out game balls in the second, but Matt, I think it's a good time to pay some bills. What do you think?
I'm wearing the Bills, if you will.
Yes, of course, our podcast sponsored by Home Field Apparel. If you're a college sports fan on the internet, of course, you are aware of Home Field Apparel. And the off chance that you don't know who Home Field Apparel is, even if this is your first time listening to this podcast, if you don't have a Twitter account, whatever, Home Field's a premium collegiate apparel brand based out of the wonderful city of Indianapolis, Indiana. The shirts, as you can see, is modeled by Matt right now. They're comfortable. They're unique. They take the time to make sure that the stuff they put on the shirts make you feel a little bit closer to your school or any other school that you might like. I mean, I know our pal Len, who you are aware of if you are a longtime member of our website's Fun Little Corner on the internet. He really wants to get a Tulane Green Wave article of clothing. The issue is the Bulls tend to have Penn State mocked as playing the Tulane Green Wave. So you can tweet at Len and you can tell him your thoughts. Len would love to hear from you. If you are interested in getting your hands on some Home Field Apparel merch, there are 15 pieces in their Penn State line. And if you were a new customer, you can use the promo code ROARLIONS, ROAR, one word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order. Again, promo code ROARLIONS, ROAR, one word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order if you were a new customer. Thank you very much to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring this edition of the podcast. Let's get back to talking about this Penn State team, Penn State's win over Michigan State. Matt, let's hand out some game balls. One on offense, one on defense. Where are you going?
I'm going to start on defense because I think it's a guy that's kind of been a little bit unheralded this year. But had a great game against his home state team, Kalen King. You touched on it earlier. Obviously had the interception that really sealed the game before the last touchdown pass. 4 passes defended. It seemed like he was around the ball all game. Probably could have had a couple more interceptions, not just on Saturday, but throughout the season. It felt good to see him kind of have that big moment late to ice the game. Offense, I think I know where you want to go, so I'm going to go with Tyler Warren because I thought he made a couple big plays. Obviously, the touchdown catch, but it felt like he was kind of one of those guys that was involved in a lot of stuff. Whether it be big blocks, the touchdown catch, kind of did a bunch of under the radar things. And I think a guy that's kind of been lost in the shuffle at tight end a little bit this year, with the emergence of Theo Johnson and Brenton Strange being bigger factors in the passing game. I thought Tyler Warren had a really good game on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree on defense. I thought Kalen King was just out of his mind, and he was, for how good Abdul Carter is, and I think Abdul Carter is a load of a football player. I thought Kalen King was the best player Penn State had in that football game on that side of the football, and it makes you think, what can he do in his second year as a starter, third year as the program? Like, he has the potential to be really, really fun, really, really special. He already is really, really fun and really, really special. And then, offense, I have to give it to Sean Clifford. I thought Clifford had, again, his best game of the season, just seemed in total control of everything at all points in the game. And like, that's all you can really ask for out of him. So give it to the two of them. And then special shout out to everyone who played their last game in Beaver Stadium, whether that's Clifford, whether that's Jair Brown, PJ Mustipher, anyone on either side of the football, even if it's a guy who might go to the NFL. Shout out to all of them. It's been a really rough couple of years for Penn State football. We were going to do a quick recap or just our general thoughts on how this season went, but like I mentioned, we need further offseason content. So we'll save that for a little bit farther down the road while we're trying to kill time before Penn State's bowl game. But Matt, this senior class, generally, it's been through some weird stuff during its between 4 and, in the case of Sean Clifford and Jonathan Sutherland, 11 years in Happy Valley. Really glad to see them go out the way they did, because I think they absolutely deserve to go out with a win.
Yeah, I think it's all those guys that have been here, the guys that are in their fourth year, started out with a 10-win season, 11-win season with the Cotton Bowl championship, tons of momentum going into the offseason, and then, that once in a generation, once in a century global pandemic thing happens, and just all the momentum of the program is crushed, and the struggles on the field have been well documented. Probably wasn't the easiest time to decide if you wanted to stay in Happy Valley or not, with opportunities for a lot of those guys elsewhere. But credit to them for sticking it out, and really, I think, being whether they're key players on the field or key guys in the locker room. I hit on it earlier, but the culture of the program is kind of back to where it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when this thing was really rolling, and it felt like James Franklin had kind of the world at his fingertips, as far as what Penn State football was about to become. Those guys stuck through it, and they've been such a key part of maintaining, I think, what the Penn State football program wants to be in this iteration, what James Franklin wants the Penn State football program to be, which has led to a whole lot of success in his 8 years now at the helm of this thing. But it's, you mentioned the guys, Jair Brown, PJ Mustipher, that have been on the field, big names for a long time. But there's so many guys that come in garbage time, late in games, when the game's been decided, that are deserve some credit too. And I'm not even going to try and name names, but guys, I think of a guy like Dom DeLuca or Devon Ellies, that have played a little bit this year, but have either been passed in the depth chart or just never really progressed up it. They've been a key part of this. They were here during the good and the bad, and now they're here during this 10-win season as well, and in a return to a New Year's Six game, hopefully. And I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but where we see this going in the next couple of seasons with the talent that's here and the momentum again, those guys are the guys that established it. And I hope that we don't forget that when they're not here, getting those accolades and that recognition on game days, because it's a cliche, but they're the guys that built this and set this program up for the success we all expect and we all hope for the next couple seasons.
Yeah, I mean, we entered this season completely unsure of what Penn State was going to be, and the number of times you've heard people talk about the leadership on this team, guys like Sean Clifford, guys like PJ Mustipher, guys like Jair Brown, all those sorts of dudes, and just what they have meant to this version of Penn State football. You tip your cap to them, clap for them, you do whatever. But it's been a really tough couple of years. Like you mentioned, that 2019 team, it felt like that was the start of 2020 is going to come around, and Penn State football is going to be a team that you're not going to want to mess with. Once in the generation global pandemic happens, the best player on both sides of the football have to leave the team. One or two breaks don't go their way earlier in the season, and it just snowballs and snowballs. Rough year. Following year, we knew that team had issues. The two biggest issues that team had kind of ran into one another in that Iowa game, with the two leaders on both sides of the football going down and having their seasons end. Those guys, as much as anyone, deserve this season. I'm really glad they were able to get it. I was really glad they were able to get it in the manner that they did. Penn State is going to end this season almost, barring something really embarrassing happening in the bowl game, as a top 10 team this year. And I think even the most optimistic thoughts on what Penn State could achieve didn't have them being a top 10 team by the time the season ended. So shout out to them for what they accomplished this season. Again, we will talk a little bit more about what about just looking back in the season, future pods. Before we go, Matt, this is probably the final, we might have one or two other things up our sleeve. This is probably the last episode of the podcast we are going to do before we figure out what bowl game Penn State is going to. CBS in its projection has Penn State going to the Cotton Bowl to take on Tulane. ESPN, both of the writers, Kyle Bonagura and Mark Schlabach, have the exact same thing. So what are you thinking? Are you also feeling a Penn State trip to the Cotton Bowl, which would mean Penn State's going back to the last New Year's Six bowl game that it played? Or do you, I know other Penn State fans we know, I am not among them, have really been invested in trying to map out a path to a specific bowl game here or there. Do you think that Penn State in, say, the Rose Bowl is something that you feel pretty good about?
I think if I had to put money on it, I would certainly bet on the Cotton Bowl, just because that is certainly the most likely scenario. Regardless of how things play out on Saturday with championship games and playoff bids and things like that. The Orange Bowl and the Rose Bowl are the two other ones that I think are possibilities. And if I had to pick one of those two, this is the old Big Ten fan growing up in Ohio State country in Columbus. This is that part of me talking. If you can go to the Rose Bowl, that's a good year. I mean, just almost without question. And I think the Sports Illustrated guys have kind of alluded to the possibility, because Ohio State's been there two of the last 4 years, played Utah last year. And regardless of how things play out with playoff bids and whatnot, that there might be a possibility that the Rose Bowl folks and the Orange Bowl folks and the Cotton Bowl folks might do a little backroom talking to try and avoid having repeat trips and repeat matchups. So if Utah knocks off USC, that might put Ohio State back into the playoff, which kind of makes all that backroom dealing a moot point. But regardless of how it plays out, I think there's a possibility they end up there, which would be really cool. I think it'd be a really cool way for a guy like Sean Clifford to end his college career. Hopefully a chance to atone for, not atone for, but finish on the right side of a great game after that all-timer against USC a couple years ago. Selfishly, that would be pretty cool, because I think that's the one place we would consider going to. And then I think the Orange Bowl would be fun, because I think if favorites play out, I think that's probably a matchup with Clemson, which I think would be a fascinating game, because I think Clemson has certainly taken a step or two back from where they've been. But it's a chance to measure yourself against one of those teams that's been where you want to get to for the better part of the last 6 or 7 years. And even though they're not what they've been during those elite seasons, a win over Clemson, an ACC champion, would certainly be an entertaining matchup. And it's a place Penn State hasn't been, I don't think, since the Florida State game back in after the 2005 season. So a place where Penn State fans haven't been in quite a while, and Miami for New Year's always sounds fun as well. But like I said, I think the Cotton Bowl is probably most likely, just based on different bowl tie-ins and the decisions that typically get made. And if things kind of play out on Saturday like we expect, with championship games and who ends up with playoff spots. It's probably a Cotton Bowl game against Tulane, which in a lot of ways feels like a kind of fitting end to a season where you're, I said on Saturday, 10 wins is never anything that I'm gonna take for granted based on what I saw as a student for 4 years. But kind of that missed opportunity. Tulane's a great team, but I don't know if it's official yet, but it sounds like Willie Fritz is going to be leaving to take another job. I think he was linked to the Georgia Tech job. So it feels like you want to cap that 10-win year with a game against one of those big name blue blood types of teams. And you certainly don't turn down a chance to play in a New Year's Six game, but I guess we'll see how things play out.
Yeah, Orange Bowl tie-ins there are ACC versus a team from the SEC, the Big Ten, or Notre Dame. The Rose Bowl is the Big Ten versus the Pac-12. Of course, the thing that makes the Rose Bowl so tricky this year is that the Big Ten champion is almost certainly going to be Michigan. If Purdue beats Michigan, that makes their life a lot easier. I don't think that's going to happen. So the Big Ten champion is going to be heading to the playoff. There's a possibility that with a couple of upsets happening elsewhere in the world of conference championship week, there are 2 Big Ten teams making into the playoff, with Ohio State sneaking into that 4 seed. So if that happens, that changes the calculus altogether, because at that point, Penn State's the best Big Ten team that isn't in the playoff, and you could just justify taking Penn State there without having to do, like you mentioned, Matt, all the backroom wheeling and dealing. But yeah, I would get banned from Twitter if Penn State played Dabo Swinney in a bowl game because I don't like him. And I would tweet things that would probably get evangelical Christians very mad at me. But yeah, like you mentioned, Cotton Bowl against Tulane, that seems to be the direction in which the wind is blowing. It would be really cool if Penn State played in the Cotton Bowl, I think, because that was with that being the last New Year's Six game, the way that, and it happened so long ago, and so many things have happened in Penn State football and in the world since then. But the way that I felt after that Memphis game, it felt to me like Penn State was setting the stage for, we're going into 2020 with a quarterback in Sean Clifford who had a really good year. We are going into 2020 with a guy on defense in Micah Parsons who could be a Heisman Trophy finalist, and a running back in Journey Brown who finished the year so strong that you can't help but think he's going to do something special. Obviously, it didn't come to fruition. I think it would be a really nice kind of full circle moment for Sean Clifford to be able to end there. Matt, are you one of those people who you don't like when a team like Penn State plays, or you don't like when Penn State plays the Group of 5 team? Because the logic is if you win, you're supposed to. Don't really get anything from that. If you lose, it's embarrassing because you shouldn't lose to a Power 5 team, a Group of 5 team.
I think, at least from a narrative perspective, which feels like that's half of what college football is anymore. Like you said, you can't win. You win, you're supposed to. You lose, oh my God, you lost to this team that has a budget a third of what yours is, and talent that is not measured in the same chart as what yours is. But I think from just a conversation standpoint, it just feels like, especially for a team like Penn State that doesn't have that quote unquote signature win this year because of just the way the schedule played out and where teams on the schedule ended up from a success standpoint, that this bowl game feels like the opportunity to get that win, because you're not going to be playing one of those top 4 or 5 teams in the country, of course. So it's an opportunity to get that win that has kind of eluded you all season. And look at me, Tulane is no slouch. It would be a great win. They're a great team. But it feels like, when you go back and you look at the schedule after the season, the win against Tulane as being your big win just doesn't kind of get the juices flowing. And it just, a win against a Clemson or a Utah or a Washington or North Carolina just feels like it gives you that bigger springboard into the offseason, into next season from an outside perspective, which at the end of the day is utterly meaningless. But that's kind of where my mindset is it would be nice to see this group that has had a really good season that I think is one of the 7 or 8 best teams in the country. To get that win, that kind of confirms that for us as fans, confirms that to them, confirms that for the big picture when you go out on the road recruiting and trying to bring kids in through the transfer portal and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Tulane, number 28 team in the country in SP Plus. According to SP Plus, Penn State will be favored over them by about 10 points in that game. They beat Kansas State in Manhattan. Kansas State is going to play TCU for a Big 12 title this weekend. So I get that stance, but I'm just of the belief that when I look back on this season, I want, Penn State being able to say they won 11 games would be pretty sick. Like, I would just be very happy with a 10-win or an 11-win Penn State season, especially considering the expectations I had coming into this year. So, give me however it happens. If Penn State were to play Tulane and beat them 56-0, I'd be very happy. If Penn State were to go to the Rose Bowl, get a little revenge on Michael Penix and beat Washington, I'd also be very happy. So, there's all that. Matt, any final things you want to say before I wrap up the pod?
No, I think it's, I'll try and keep this brief, but I think this has been a great season for Penn State, considering where they were 3 months ago and all these questions. They didn't answer all of them. They answered a lot of them. And it just feels like the health of the program was somewhat in question, this time 3 months ago before the Purdue game. And I think if you talk to any rational Penn State fan or anyone who covers this sport for a living, they're going to tell you that, Penn State's in a really good spot, which is not something we were saying going into the season, and certainly not this time a year ago. To see, I think, the work that everyone in the program has done to get them back to where they are right now and where they're set up to go the next few years is really good to see. Just as a fan, the team you cheer for stuck with their plan and got back pointed in the right direction in a really positive way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been it was a much better season than I anticipated. When your only losses are to 2 of the 5 best teams in college football, you don't love that. It kind of stinks. But generally pretty happy with things, especially because I thought this was an 8-win football team. But yeah, we'll have plenty of offseason content coming for all of you in the coming days and weeks. We'll have reaction to future decisions made by Penn State players to potentially return or go to the NFL. Any other big news that might come through the Penn State Twitterverse. And of course, we got ourselves a bowl game coming up, so we'll be talking about that. We want to thank everyone for listening to this edition of the podcast. As always, make sure you're subscribing wherever you go and get your podcast. If you're using Apple Podcasts, please go leave us a 5-star review. If you're using Spotify, anything else, go leave us a 5-star. Go give us a 5-star rating over there. Please follow us over on our Twitter account at RLR Blog. Head over to YouTube, hop into the YouTube comment sections, talk about Penn State football there. Have some fun there. Might as well have some fun. We all die someday. And of course, thank you very much to our sponsor, Home Field Apparel, for sponsoring this podcast. Again, use the promo code Roar Lions Roar, one word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order if you are a new customer. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. For Matt DeBear, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.